The helmet sat on the cathedral spire like a crown. Sergeant Marcus Thorne pressed his back against the rubble. His breath came in sharp bursts. The metal was still warm from the explosion 3 blocks away, 27 hours. That's how long he'd been running. The helmet belonged to Brother Captain Valerius, or what used to be Brother Captain Valerius, before the warp took him, before his armor turned the color of dried blood, before his voice became something that made children weep in their sleep. Thorne's hands shook as he checked his ammunition. 14 rounds left. His squad of 40 Imperial Guardsmen had become 14, then 7, then 3, now just him. The smell hit him first, sulfur and burning flesh. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Frost formed on his rifle barrel despite the summer heat. They were close. A sound echoed through the ruins, metal scraping against stone, deliberate, patient, like a predator that knew its prey had nowhere left to run. Thorne remembered Valerius from before, how the Space Marine had saved his regiment on Cadia, how those same hands that once blessed the wounded now carved blasphemous symbols into living flesh. The scraping stopped. Silence pressed down like a weight. Thorne's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Sweat stung his eyes. The acrid taste of fear coated his tongue. A shadow moved across the cathedral wall. 8 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to block doorways. The silhouette of something that had once been humanity's greatest defender. Thorne closed his eyes, whispered a prayer to the Emperor. Opened them again. The shadow was gone, but the laughter remained. Deep, resonant, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. The kind of sound that made reality itself seem fragile. Thorne knew the stories. How Chaos Space Marines hunted, how they played with their prey, how they savored the moment when hope finally died in their victims' eyes. He also knew something else. Valerius wasn't hunting him to kill him. The corruption spread through contact, through fear, through the slow realization that everything you believed in could be twisted, perverted, made into something obscene. Thorne looked at his hands, still steady, still human for now. The helmet on the spire caught the dying sunlight, a monument to what chaos could do to even the Emperor's finest. But why had Valerius left it there? What message was he trying to send? In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. For 10,000 years, the galaxy has burned under the weight of endless conflict. But among all the horrors that stalk humanity through the void, nothing compares to being marked for death by Chaos Space Marines. These are not mere soldiers. They are fallen angels. Once humanity's greatest protectors, now twisted into something far worse than any alien threat. Where Imperial Space Marines defend with honor, Chaos Marines hunt with malice. Where loyalists kill for duty, traitors kill for pleasure. The corruption that flows through their veins doesn't just change their bodies, it warps their very souls into instruments of pure sadism. To be hunted by chaos, Space Marines is to become prey in a game where mercy is weakness and suffering is currency. They don't simply want you dead. They want you broken, screaming, begging for an end that will never come quickly enough. This is the story of what it means to run from gods who have chosen damnation, of ordinary humans caught in the crosshairs of beings who measure time in millennia and count victories in civilizations burned to ash. In the 41st millennium, when these monsters choose you as their quarry, hope becomes the cruelest joke of all. The air tastes of copper and ozone when they arrive. The ground trembles under ceramite boots that have crushed 1,000 worlds. Their vox-amplified laughter echoes through hab blocks and bunkers alike. A sound that drives men mad before the killing even begins. Some say the worst part isn't the dying. It's the hunting. The cat-and-mouse game that can last days, weeks, sometimes months. Because Chaos Marines don't just take lives, they take time. They savor the fear. They feed on desperation. Every footstep behind you could be your last. Every shadow might hide 8 feet of power-armored nightmare. Every breath you take is borrowed time in a universe that has forgotten the meaning of mercy. Tonight, we follow 3 separate hunts across 3 different worlds. 3 groups of ordinary people who made the fatal mistake of drawing the attention of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. But what none of them realized was that being chosen as prey was just the beginning. Corporal Jensen thought he understood fear. 3 tours on Mordian Prime. 2 evacuation runs through the screaming vortex. He'd seen PDF troopers reduced to whimpering children when the artillery started falling. But this was different. The silence stretched across the hab block ruins like a held breath. 43 Imperial Guardsmen crouched in the rubble, their laser guns trained on empty doorways. The acrid smell of promethium smoke burned their nostrils. Sweat pooled in the creases of their flak armor despite the bone-deep cold. Jensen pressed his vox bead. Static answered. Then came the sound. Not footsteps. Footsteps implied stealth, caution. This was the deliberate scrape of ceramite against rockcrete, the grinding of metal joints that had tasted 10,000 years of war. Each step announced itself like a funeral bell. Private Kellum's hands shook so violently, his lasgun barrel rattled against the debris. The sound echoed through the ruins. The scraping stopped. Jensen felt his bladder release. Warm urine ran down his legs, mixing with the dust and blood caked on his uniform. Around him, 42 other soldiers discovered that courage was just another word for ignorance. Because now they could smell it. Rotting meat wrapped in incense. Ozone from corrupted power armor. The metallic tang of spilled blood that had never quite dried. It rolled through the air like a physical presence, making their stomachs clench and their vision blur. Kellum started to hyperventilate. The boy was 19. Had a sweetheart back on Cadia named Maria, who wrote letters about their future farm. Jensen wanted to tell him to run, wanted to scream at all of them to scatter like rats before the exterminators arrived. But his throat had closed. His muscles had locked. Because somewhere in his lizard brain, every survival instinct was screaming the same message. Don't move. Don't breathe. Maybe it won't see you. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Frost began forming on their weapons. Their breath came out in panicked puffs of vapor that hung in the air like surrender flags. Then Jensen saw the shadow. 8 feet tall, broad as a chimera transport, moving with the fluid grace of something that had perfected the art of killing before their planet had even formed. Kellum whimpered, a single broken sound that cut through the silence like a blade. The shadow stopped moving. Jensen closed his eyes and tried to remember his daughter's face. But the real horror hadn't even begun. Sergeant Maria Voss pressed her back against the cold ceramite wall. Her breathing came in short, controlled bursts. The footsteps had stopped. For 3 hours, the Iron Warriors had been hunting her squad through the ruins of Hive Tertius. The sound of their ceramite boots against broken rockcrete had become a metronome of death. Clank, 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 then silence. Voss knew what the silence meant. They weren't tired. They weren't lost. They were playing. Chaos Space Marines don't hunt like predators. she whispered into her vox, hoping someone was still alive to hear. They hunt like gods, who've grown bored with mortals. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees since the hunt began. Not from weather. From fear, every Imperial Guard manual taught the same lie. Know your enemy. But how do you know something that was once human, then became superhuman, then chose to become something worse? Voss had seen Astartes before. Loyalist Space Marines moved with purpose, efficiency, honor. Chaos Space Marines moved like they had eternity to savor your terror. The wall behind her began to vibrate. Low, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. No, like laughter. They can smell fear, her commissar had said before the Vox went dead. But they prefer to taste it. Voss understood now. This wasn't warfare. This was theater. She was the audience and the performance. The vibration stopped. Somewhere in the darkness, metal scraped against stone, deliberate, theatrical. They wanted her to hear it. They wanted her to imagine what was making that sound. They wanted her mind to break before her body. The human psyche, a voice echoed from the shadows, is such a fragile thing. The voice was wrong, too deep, too perfect, like a cathedral organ played in a graveyard. Voss felt something warm running down her leg. Shame burned hotter than fear. We were like you once, the voice continued, closer now. We remember what it feels like to be small, mortal, afraid. A red eye lens pierced the darkness, 8 feet off the ground. We remember, the Iron Warrior said, because we choose to remember. Memory makes the hunt sweeter. Voss raised her laser gun with trembling hands. The weapon felt like a child's toy. The Chaos Space Marine stepped into the light. 10,000 years of war had carved themselves into his armor. His helmet bore the skull of something that might have once been human. But his eyes still remembered being mortal. That was the most terrifying thing of all. Run, he whispered. Voss ran. Behind her, laughter echoed through the ruins. Not human laughter, something that remembered being human. But what she heard next made her blood freeze completely. Sergeant Caney felt it before he saw it. A wrongness in the air. The kind that makes your skin crawl and your teeth ache. He'd been patrolling the outer districts of Hive City Morteus for 3 standard hours. Same route, same checkpoints, same dead silence that had settled over the lower levels since the reports started coming in. Reports of missing patrol squads. Reports of screaming in the night. Reports that command dismissed as civilian hysteria. But Caney knew better. 20 years in the Imperial Guard teaches you to trust your gut. And right now, his gut was screaming. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the last hour. His breath misted in the recycled air, something that should have been impossible this deep in the hive's warm belly. Then he smelled it. Brimstone. Ozone. And underneath it all, something sweet and rotten that made his stomach turn, the smell of corruption. Caney's Voxcaster crackled. Static filled his earpiece, punctuated by what sounded like laughter, deep, inhuman, echoing from somewhere impossibly far away. Base, this is Patrol 7-7. Do you copy? More static, more laughter. His hands found his laser gun without conscious thought. Standard issue, reliable, utterly inadequate for what was coming, because Caney had heard the stories. Whispered in the barracks after lights out. Stories of the traitor legions, of space marines who had turned their backs on the Emperor and embraced something far worse. Stories of the hunt. The corridor ahead stretched into darkness. Emergency lighting flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with purpose. The metal grating beneath his boots groaned with each step. the sound echoing off the walls like a dinner bell, announcing his presence, advertising his location. Caney stopped walking. In the silence that followed, he heard it. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Each one striking the deck plating with the weight of a falling boulder. But these weren't human footsteps. They were too heavy. Too rhythmic. Too wrong. The sound of ceramite boots on steel. The unmistakable gait of a space marine in full power armor. Caney's blood turned to ice water in his veins. He keyed his Vox again, whispering now. "Base, this is Patrol 7-7. I have contact. Repeat, I have." The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hive's ever-present hum seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the darkness ahead, came a voice. Deep as a tomb, cold as the void between stars. "Run, little guardsman." But Caney's legs had already made that decision for him. Captain Vex had stalked Imperial worlds for 3 centuries. His warband of Night Lords knew the rhythm of terror. How to break minds before bodies. How to make entire populations beg for the mercy of death. But today, something was different. The hive city of Tertius Prime should have been screaming by now. His Chaos Marines had been hunting through the Underhive for 6 hours, leaving their signature calling cards. Flayed corpses hanging from rusted pipes, children's toys soaked in blood. Yet the silence felt wrong. Vex's enhanced hearing caught it first. The soft scrape of ceramite on metal. Footsteps that matched their own cadence perfectly. "Brother Captain," voxed Sergeant Krath, his voice tight with something Vex had never heard before. "Fear. We're being followed." The realization hit like a bolt shell to the chest. They weren't the only hunters in these tunnels. Vex's thermal sensors picked up heat signatures moving parallel to their position. 8 contacts. Moving with military precision through ventilation shafts they hadn't even noticed. Imperial Space Marines, but not just any Space Marines. The biosignatures were wrong, too fast, too coordinated, and that smell drifting through the recycled air, ozone and burnt metal. Grey Knights. The Emperor's demon hunters had found them. Vex's enhanced hearts hammered against his ribcage. For 300 years, he had been the nightmare that stalked innocent civilians. Farmers, factory workers, children. Now he understood what it felt like to be prey. The first Psy-cannon blast vaporized Brother Malthius instantly. His screams echoed off tunnel walls as his chaos-tainted flesh simply ceased to exist. Vex's warband scattered like roaches when the lights came on. These tunnels that had been their hunting ground became a maze of death. Every shadow could hide a Grey Knight. Every corner could be their last. "Run," Vex whispered into his Vox, the word tasting like acid on his tongue. For the first time in centuries, the Night Lords knew true terror. The kind of bone-deep dread they had inflicted on countless innocents. Behind them, the Grey Knights advanced with methodical precision. No taunts, no theatrics. Just the cold certainty of execution. Vex's breathing came in ragged gasps as he pressed against a rusted bulkhead. His enhanced hearing caught the whisper of blessed ammunition being loaded into storm bolters. They were being hunted by something worse than monsters. They were being hunted by justice. But the real horror hadn't even begun. Sergeant Voss pressed his back against the cold rockcrete wall. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. The metallic taste of fear coated his tongue. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, something massive moved. The sound wasn't human. Too heavy. Too deliberate. Each footstep shook dust from the ceiling above. Voss had fought orcs. He'd faced Tyranids. He'd even survived a demon incursion on Mordian Prime. But this was different. This was being hunted by something that had once been human. Something that understood exactly how humans thought, how they moved, how they broke. The Chaos Space Marine stalking him had been Astartes for 3 centuries. A killer perfected by the Emperor himself, then twisted by the Dark Gods into something worse than any Xenos nightmare. Voss knew the statistics. An average Space Marine could track a target across 17 kilometers of urban terrain. They could smell fear sweat from 200 meters away. Their enhanced hearing could detect a human heartbeat through solid walls. And this one had been hunting for sport. The footsteps stopped. Voss held his breath, pressing deeper into the shadows. His lasgun felt pathetic in his hands. What good was a flashlight against a demigod? Then he heard it, laughter, low, rumbling, echoing off the tunnel walls. The sound of something that found genuine amusement in terror. "I can smell your desperation, little guardsman." The voice was wrong. Too deep, distorted by Vox grills and centuries of corruption. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Your Emperor made us to be perfect killers. But the gods, they made us so much more." Voss's hands trembled. The Chaos Marine wasn't even trying to hide anymore. It was playing with him, like a cat with a wounded bird. "Do you know what we did to your squad?" Voss squeezed his eyes shut. He didn't want to know, but the voice continued anyway. "We kept them alive. For hours. We wanted to understand how long human hope could last when faced with inevitability." The footsteps resumed. Closer now. Voss could hear the whir of servo motors, the soft hiss of recycling atmosphere systems, the subtle click of ceramite plates adjusting with each movement. This wasn't just a predator. This was a machine built for murder, refined by millennia of warfare, and driven insane by gods that fed on suffering. And it was 20 meters away. Voss gripped his lasgun tighter. Maybe he could take one shot. Maybe he could die fighting instead of cowering. Then the wall beside him exploded. But what emerged from the smoke wasn't what he expected. Sergeant Voss pressed his back against the corroded metal wall, feeling the cold seep through his flak armor. His breath came in short, controlled bursts. The footsteps had stopped. For 3 days now, he'd been teaching his squad the impossible art of hiding from predators who could smell fear itself. The Chaos Space Marines hunting them weren't just warriors. They were living nightmares wrapped in ceramite and hatred. Stay low. Stay quiet. Stay alive. He whispered to Private Chen, whose hands trembled as she gripped her lasgun. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a veteran of 12 campaigns, reduced to teaching children how to cower like rats in the walls of their own city. But these weren't ordinary enemies. Chaos Marines moved with the patience of apex predators. They would stand motionless for hours, listening for the telltale scratch of fingernails against metal, the soft wheeze of panicked breathing, the metallic tang of human sweat mixing with industrial decay. Voss had learned their patterns the hard way. The World Eaters preferred the hunt. They would drive their prey into the open with calculated brutality. The Night Lords savored psychological warfare, leaving mutilated corpses as breadcrumbs to follow. And the word bearers? They turned hunting into ritual. "Remember," Voss breathed to his squad, "they can hear your heartbeat through a bulkhead. They can smell your adrenaline from 3 levels down. Your only advantage is that they enjoy the chase." Chen's eyes widened. "They enjoy it?" Pain and terror are currency to them. The longer you survive, the more valuable you become. The temperature dropped suddenly, Frost began forming on the metal pipes above their heads. Something was coming. Voss felt the familiar weight of despair settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The air itself seemed to thicken with malevolent presence. This was how it always started. Reality bending around the approach of something that shouldn't exist. He placed a steady hand on Chen's shoulder, feeling her body shake with each labored breath. The young private had volunteered for this hell, just like the rest of them. Now she was learning what it truly meant to be prey. The wall behind them began to vibrate, with a low rhythmic pounding. Not footsteps. Something far worse. Something was coming through the wall itself. Voss closed his eyes and whispered a prayer to the Emperor, knowing it would go unanswered in this forsaken place. But what emerged from the darkness wasn't what any of them expected. Sergeant Caney pressed his back against the rusted bulkhead, feeling the cold metal bite through his flak armor. The ship's corridors had become a maze of death, each shadow potentially hiding 8 feet of corrupted transhuman fury. The smell hit him first. Copper and sulfur, mixed with something sweet and wrong. Blood and warp taint. His squad of 12 had been reduced to 3 in the past hour. Not killed, taken. The Chaos Space Marines weren't just hunting them. They were collecting. Movement. 200 meters. Whispered Trooper Vex, her voice barely audible through the Vox. The auspex in her trembling hands painted green dots that moved with predatory patience. Caney's throat felt like sandpaper. He'd seen what happened to captured Imperial Guard. The scream still echoed from the lower decks, where his missing soldiers were being processed. The temperature dropped suddenly. Frost formed on the metal walls as something massive moved in the darkness ahead. Each footstep rang like a funeral, bell, deliberate and unhurried. They had time. The Chaos Marines always gave their prey time to run, to hope, to break. "Sir," Vex's voice cracked. "The auspex is showing. 12 contacts. But we only started with 12 soldiers." Caney's blood turned to ice water. The missing weren't dead. They were walking again, twisted into something else, hunting their former brothers with inhuman patience. A laugh echoed through the corridors, deep, resonant, and utterly without mercy. It came from everywhere at once, bouncing off the walls like a physical thing. "Run, little guardsmen," the voice boomed, speaking perfect Gothic with an accent that predated the Imperium. "Your friends are so eager to see you again." Caney saw them then, shambling into the pale emergency lighting. His soldiers, still wearing their uniforms, still carrying their weapons. But their eyes glowed with warp fire, and their movements were puppet jerky, controlled by something vast and hungry. Trooper Martinez stepped into view, his face a mask of dried blood and surgical scars. When he smiled, Caney could see fresh stitches holding his jaw in place. "Hello, Sergeant," Martinez said in his own voice, but with something else underneath it, something that made the words feel oily and wrong. "We've been waiting for you." The Chaos Space Marine emerged from the shadows behind the corrupted soldiers, his armor black as void, decorated with still twitching trophies. But what Caney saw next made him forget everything else, including how to breathe. Sergeant Valdris crouched behind the twisted metal remains of what had once been a hab block. His breath came in short, controlled bursts. The air tasted of sulfur and burnt flesh. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, the Chaos Space Marine was waiting. Valdris had been running for 3 hours now. His squad was dead. His Vox was silent. The city around him had become a maze of shadows and death. But this wasn't random slaughter. This was sport. The traitor Astartes could have killed him a dozen times already. Valdris knew this. Every Imperial Guard veteran knew the stories. Chaos Space Marines didn't just kill. They hunted. A metallic scrape echoed from the alley to his left. Valdris pressed himself deeper into the rubble, feeling jagged concrete bite into his shoulder. The sound came again, deliberate, taunting. "Little mouse?" A voice rumbled through the darkness. The words were spoken in perfect Gothic, but underneath lay something else, something that made Valdris's skin crawl. "I can smell your fear." Valdris closed his eyes. His laser gun felt pathetic in his hands. He'd seen what those weapons did to Chaos Marines. Nothing. The footsteps began again, slow, patient, each one a promise of what was coming. This was the game they played. Not the quick death of battle, but the slow terror of the hunt. They savored it, fed on it. Valdris remembered the briefings. How Chaos Marines would sometimes keep their prey alive for days, weeks even, always just close enough to catch, never quite letting them escape. The temperature dropped suddenly. Valdris could see his breath now, white puffs in the crimson darkness. Something was wrong, even more wrong than before. The footsteps had stopped. Valdris strained his ears, listening for any sound, any hint of movement, silence. Then he felt it, hot breath on the back of his neck. "Found you," the voice whispered. Valdris spun around, finger on the trigger, but there was nothing there. Just empty air and the stench of corruption. Laughter echoed from all directions at once. Deep, inhuman, delighted. The Chaos Marine wasn't just hunting him, it was playing with him. Valdris stumbled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The laughter grew louder, bouncing off the ruined walls like a living thing. He turned to run, but froze. There, painted in fresh blood across the wall in front of him, were two words. "My turn." The laughter stopped. Everything stopped. Then Valdris heard something that made his blood turn to ice. Footsteps, coming from everywhere at once. Sergeant Kane's boots slipped on wet rockcrete as he stumbled through the underhive tunnels. Behind him, the sound of ceramite armor scraping against metal grew closer. The Chaos Space Marines weren't running. They didn't need to. They knew he had nowhere left to go. Kane's lungs burned with each ragged breath. The stale air tasted of rust and decay, thick enough to choke on. His laser gun felt pathetic in his trembling hands, a child's toy against gods of war. The tunnel ahead split into 3 passages. Left led to the old water treatment plant. Flooded, a dead end, right curved toward the hab blocks, where his squad had died screaming 2 hours ago. Straight descended into darkness so complete it seemed solid. Kane chose darkness. His footsteps echoed off unseen walls as he descended. The temperature dropped with each step, until his breath misted in the frigid air. Somewhere in the black, water dripped with metronomic precision. Then the footsteps behind him stopped. Kane froze, pressing his back against the cold tunnel wall. His heart hammered so loud he was certain they could hear it. The silence stretched, becoming its own form of torture. Why had they stopped? A low chuckle drifted down the tunnel. Not human. Not anymore. "We can smell your fear, little guardsman." The voice belonged to something that had once been a space marine. Now it carried the weight of 10,000 years of hatred, distorted by a Vox grill that had tasted too much blood. "Your terror is exquisite." Kane bit down on his tongue until he tasted copper. The pain kept him focused, kept him from screaming. Another voice joined the first. Deeper. Hungrier. "The hunt is almost over." We've driven you exactly where we wanted you. Kane's blood turned to ice. They hadn't been chasing him. They'd been herding him, like cattle to slaughter. The darkness ahead suddenly didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied, waiting. Kane raised his lasgun with shaking hands, knowing it was useless. Behind him, armored footsteps resumed their steady approach. Ahead, something breathed in the dark. He was trapped between two nightmares. The tunnel filled with the sound of weapons powering up, chainswords revving to life, the wet sound of something inhuman licking its lips. "Please," Kane whispered to the Emperor. "Let it be quick." But Chaos Space Marines weren't known for mercy. They were known for making death last. Corporal Elena Vasquez had been running for 3 days. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The acrid smoke of burning hab blocks filled her lungs. Behind her, the steady thrum of power armor grew closer, always closer. The Chaos Space Marines of the Iron Warriors had turned her hive city into a hunting ground. Not for resources, not for territory, for sport. Elena pressed herself against the cold ceramite wall of a collapsed transit station. Her hands shook as she checked her lasgun's power pack. 7% remaining. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the rubble-strewn corridors. Each step deliberate, measured. They weren't rushing because they didn't need to. They had all the time in the galaxy. "Little mouse," a voice boomed through external Vox speakers. The words dripped with mechanical distortion and ancient malice. "We can smell your fear." Elena bit down on her tongue until she tasted copper. The pain kept her focused, kept her moving. She had seen what happened to the others who were caught. Sergeant Morrison, flayed alive and hung from the cathedral spires. His screams had echoed for hours before the blessed silence came. Civilian families herded into kill zones, forced to run while bolt rounds exploded around their feet. The Chaos Marines would wound, not kill. Make the hunt last longer. Elena crawled through a ventilation shaft, her uniform catching on jagged metal. The darkness pressed against her like a living thing. Somewhere in the shadows, she heard the distinctive whir of Auspex scanners. They were tracking her heat signature, her heartbeat, the very terror that coursed through her veins. The Iron Warriors had perfected the art of psychological warfare over 10,000 years. They knew exactly how much fear a human mind could endure before it shattered completely. And they kept their prey just below that threshold. Elena emerged into what had once been a market square. Bodies lay scattered like broken dolls. The stench of decay mixed with the ozone smell of recent weapons fire. Then she saw it. Movement in her peripheral vision, a massive silhouette against the burning skyline. 8 feet of corrupted ceramite and ancient hatred. The Chaos Space Marine stood motionless, watching her with glowing red optics, waiting. Elena raised her lasgun with trembling hands. The weapon felt pathetic against such a monster. The Space Marine tilted his head, almost curious. Then he spoke 2 words that froze her blood. "Run, little mouse." But as Elena turned to flee, she realized something that made her stomach drop. The real horror hadn't even begun. The air tastes of copper and burnt ozone. Servant Kale presses himself against the rusted bulkhead, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The Voxcaster crackles with static 3 decks below. "They're playing with us," whispers Medici Voss, her hands trembling as she clutches her surgical kit. "They could have killed us hours ago." The temperature drops 10 degrees. Footsteps. Deliberate. Measured. Each bootfall echoes through the ship's corridors like a death knell. The Chaos Space Marines aren't hunting them. They're savoring them. Kyle remembers the stories from his homeworld. How the traitor legions would herd populations into kill zones, not for efficiency, but for the exquisite terror it produced. Fear has a smell, they say. Sweet, metallic, intoxicating. The Emperor protects. Voss mouths silently, but her eyes betray the truth. No protection exists here. Only the slow unwinding of sanity as death approaches on ceramite feet. A laugh drifts through the ventilation system. Deep, resonant, utterly inhuman. The sound makes Kale's skin crawl, raises every hair on his arms. This isn't random violence. It's choreographed cruelty, each moment calculated to extract maximum psychological torment before the final strike. They're herding us toward the engine deck. Voss realizes, her medical training parsing the pattern. Every route we've taken, every escape we've found. Kale's blood turns to ice. The realization hits like a physical blow. The unlocked doors, the conveniently placed hiding spots, the moments when they should have been caught but weren't. None of it was luck. We're not prey, he whispers, the words tasting like ash. We're entertainment. Voss stares at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. The Chaos Marines aren't just hunting them. They're conducting a symphony of terror, each note perfectly timed, each crescendo building toward some unspeakable finale. The footsteps stop. Silence stretches like a blade across their nerves. Kyle can hear his own heartbeat, thunderous in the sudden quiet. Somewhere in the darkness, a helmet's eye lenses glow like dying stars. Little mortals. A voice rumbles through the walls, distorted by vox grills and centuries of corruption. Do you know what fear tastes like when it's been properly aged? Voss grips Kyle's arm, her fingernails drawing blood through his sleeve. The voice continues, almost conversational. We've been perfecting this hunt for 3,000 years. Each scream, each whimper, each desperate prayer to your corpse god. It all adds flavor. Kyle closes his eyes, trying to block out the words. But the real question burns in his mind like acid. If they're being hunted for sport, what happens when the game finally ends? The laughter returns. Closer now. Much closer. Corporal Martinez pressed his back against the twisted metal beam. His breath came in short, ragged gasps that echoed through the skeletal remains of Hive City Tertius. The silence was wrong. For 3 hours, the chaos space, Marines had been hunting his squad through these ruins. Now only Martinez remained, and the silence meant they were close. Very close. He could smell them before he saw them. That sickly sweet stench of corruption that made his stomach clench. The metallic tang of spilled blood mixed with something else. Something that shouldn't exist. A low chuckle drifted through the rubble. Deep. Inhuman. Amused. Little mouse, a voice called out, distorted by vox grills and centuries of damnation. We know you're here. Martinez's hands trembled as he gripped his laser gun. The weapon felt pathetic against what was hunting him. These weren't just enemy soldiers. They were living nightmares wrapped in ceramite and spite. The ground vibrated with each footstep. 8 feet tall, half a ton of corrupted flesh and ancient armor, moving with predatory patience through their killing ground. Your friend screamed so beautifully. Another voice taunted from a different direction. Sergeant Torres begged for his mother at the end. Martinez bit down hard on his tongue. The pain kept him focused, kept him from breaking. They were playing with him. This wasn't warfare. This was entertainment. A cat batting at a wounded mouse before the final strike. He could hear them now. The soft scrape of ceramite against concrete. the wet sound of something being dragged, the mechanical whir of ancient servo motors. They were surrounding him. Martinez closed his eyes and tried to remember his daughter's face, her laugh, the way she said "Daddy" when he came home from deployment. But all he could see was Sergeant Torres, what was left of him. "Found you." The voice came from directly above. Martinez looked up and saw a nightmare looking back. Crimson eye lenses glowed in a skull-faced helmet. Brass trim caught the dying light. 8 feet of corrupted space marine perched on the beam like a gargoyle, waiting, watching, savoring this moment. The Chaos Marine dropped down with impossible grace for something so massive. His boots cracked the concrete where he landed. "Run," the monster whispered, tilting his head like a curious predator. "Run and make this interesting." Martinez ran. Behind him, laughter echoed through the ruins. Not hurried, not concerned, patient. But as Martinez rounded the corner, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Fresh boot prints in the dust. Human boot prints. Someone else was still alive in this nightmare. But that was impossible. You thought the traitor legionnaires were the worst thing that could hunt you. You were wrong. The temperature drops 20 degrees in seconds. Your breath mists in the suddenly frigid air as reality itself begins to warp around the advancing Chaos Space Marines. Because these aren't just fallen warriors anymore. They are vessels, living conduits for powers that existed before your son was born. The warp bleeds through their presence, turning the abandoned hive sector into something from your darkest nightmares. Sergeant Caney's Vox unit crackles with inhuman laughter that seems to come from everywhere at once. The sound makes your teeth ache and your vision blur. "Do you hear that?" he whispers, his voice barely audible over the growing psychic storm. The laughter isn't coming from the Marines. It's coming from inside their armor. The lead Chaos Marine, once a proud son of the Emperor, tilts his horned helmet toward your hiding spot. When he speaks, 4 voices emerge from his Vox grill simultaneously. 1 human, 3 decidedly not. "We smell your terror, little mortals. It tastes like copper and desperation." The walls around you begin to weep blood that defies gravity, flowing upward in spiraling crimson streams. The metal floor beneath your feet grows soft, almost organic, pulsing with an alien heartbeat. This is what happens when gods decide to hunt. Caney grabs your shoulder, his gauntleted fingers digging deep enough to bruise. "When I give the signal, you run. Don't look back. Don't think. Just run." But where can you run when your hunters can reshape reality itself? The Chaos Marine raises his bolter, a weapon that was once sacred, now corrupted beyond recognition. Demonic faces writhe across its surface, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. "Your Emperor cannot hear you here," the thing wearing power armor announces. "But our gods, they listen to everything." The air tastes of sulfur and burnt offerings. Your skin crawls as invisible eyes examine every thought, every memory, every secret shame you've ever carried. You realize with growing horror that this hunt was never about killing you quickly. It was about showing you what mortals become when gods take interest in their suffering. Caney's hand tightens on his plasma pistol. The weapon's charging coils begin to glow, casting eerie blue light across his grim features. "On my mark," he breathes. But the real horror hadn't even begun. Sergeant Korath had stalked prey across 17 worlds. Now he was the one being hunted. The Chaos Space Marine pressed his massive frame against the corrugated metal wall. His power armor's systems flickered with static. The acrid smell of burning circuitry filled his nostrils. Something was wrong. very wrong. The Imperial Guard regiment he'd been systematically butchering had vanished. Not fled. Vanished. Korath's enhanced hearing caught the whisper of movement above. Dust particles drifted down like ash. The temperature dropped 3 degrees in as many seconds. He'd been hunting them through the industrial maze for 6 hours, picking them off one by one, savoring their terror. But the screaming had stopped an hour ago. Now the silence pressed against his skull like a physical weight. His chainsword felt heavy in his grip. The blessed weapon that had carved through countless mortals suddenly seemed inadequate. A shadow moved across the grimy window to his left. Korath spun, bolt pistol raised. Nothing there. Just twisted metal and darkness. But the shadow had been wrong. Too tall, too angular. He'd hunted space marines before. This wasn't one of his loyalist brothers. This was something else. Something that moved like liquid death through the industrial labyrinth. The Chaos Marine's enhanced physiology registered elevated stress hormones. Fear, an emotion he'd forgotten he could feel. Another sound, metal scraping against metal. Deliberate, patient. Korath realized with growing horror that he was being herded, driven like livestock toward some predetermined killing ground. The hunter's mind raced through tactical assessments. Exit routes, weapon loadouts, combat formations, all useless. He was alone, cut off from his warband. And something was playing with him, the same way he'd played with those Imperial Guardsmen. The irony tasted like copper and shame. A bolt round sparked off the wall inches from his head. The muzzle flash came from everywhere and nowhere. The shooter remained invisible. Korath's heart hammered against his ribs. Sweat beaded beneath his helmet's seal. The predator who terrorized entire sectors was learning what it felt like to be prey. To know that death was circling, to understand that escape was impossible. Another bolt round, closer this time. A warning shot, the message was clear. Run. Korath ran. Behind him, something laughed with a voice like grinding bone. But the real horror was just beginning to reveal itself. Corporal Vex pressed his back against the cold metal wall. His breath came in short, ragged gasps that echoed through the abandoned hab block. The smell hit him first. Burnt ozone mixed with something else. Something wrong. Like copper pennies left in acid rain. Like flesh that had been turned inside out. It was the scent of the warp. Vex had heard the stories from veterans who'd survived chaos encounters. How the air itself becomes poisoned when they're near. How reality bends and twists around their presence. Now he understood. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. His rifle's metal grip burned his palm with sudden cold. Ice crystals formed on the concrete walls, spreading in patterns that hurt to look at. Somewhere in the darkness, ceramite boots scraped against debris. Slow, deliberate, patient. Vex counted the footsteps. 1, 2, 3. Each one closer than the last, each one heavier than any human should be. His squad had been 12 strong when they entered this sector. 12 Imperial Guardsmen with laser guns and determination. Now Vex couldn't even hear their vox chatter. The silence was absolute, except for those footsteps. Vex tried to remember his training. Chaos Space Marines were still Astartes, still superhuman, but corrupted, twisted by forces that made nightmares seem pleasant. A child's laughter echoed from 3 floors up. Vex's blood turned to ice water. There were no children in this sector. There hadn't been children here for months. The laughter came again, closer now, from the hallway just around the corner. Vex raised his laser gun with trembling hands. The weapon felt like a toy, like bringing a candle to fight the sun. The footsteps stopped. In the sudden quiet, Vex could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, could smell his own fear sweat mixing with that horrible warp stench. Then came the voice, deep as a ship's hull cracking, smooth as poisoned honey. "Little soldier." The words seemed to crawl inside Vex's skull. Each syllable left traces of corruption behind, like oil stains on his thoughts. "I can smell your terror. It's exquisite." Vex bit down on his tongue until he tasted blood. The pain helped him focus, helped him remember he was still human, still alive, for now. The voice came again, closer. "Run, little mouse. Make this interesting." Vex didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted down the corridor, his boots slipping on frost-slicked metal. Behind him, something that had once been an angel of death began to laugh. Captain Thorne pressed his back against the corrugated metal wall. His breath came in sharp bursts, each exhale visible in the freezing air of the underhive. 3 days. 3 days since the Crimson slaughter had made planetfall on Tertius Prime. 3 days since 800 Imperial Guardsmen had become 27 survivors playing a deadly game of hide-and-seek. The stench of promethium and rotting corpses hung thick in the recycled air. Somewhere in the darkness above, ceramite boots thundered against steel grating. Each footstep sent vibrations through the Hablock's skeleton. Thorne's Vox unit crackled with static. Sergeant Caney's voice whispered through the interference. "Movement. Sector 7. They're hurting us." The captain's blood turned to ice water. For 72 hours, they'd assumed they were running, hiding, surviving through cunning and desperation. The Chaos Space Marine seemed to appear randomly. A flash of crimson armor here, the whine of a chainsword there. But herding suggested something far worse. Thorne closed his eyes, forcing his tactical mind to work. The pattern became clear. Every ambush had driven them deeper into the underhive. Every escape route had led them further from the surface, further from hope. "They're not hunting us," he whispered into his Vox. "We're being collected." The temperature dropped another degree. His fingers, already numb, began to lose feeling entirely. In the distance, something that might have once been human screamed. A sound that echoed through the metal corridors like a prayer to forgotten gods. Private Voss emerged from the shadows, his laser gun clutched against his chest like a talisman. The boy's eyes had changed. 3 days ago, they'd held the bright confidence of youth. Now they reflected nothing but hollow acceptance. "Sir," Voss whispered, "I found something." He led Thorne through a maze of abandoned machinery to a service tunnel. Inside, carved into the metal with what looked like claws, were tally marks. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Each mark was accompanied by a number. Dates. The oldest went back 40 years. Emperor's throne. Thorne breathed. The Crimson slaughter hadn't just arrived 3 days ago. They'd been here for decades, hunting, collecting, playing their twisted games with generation after generation of Imperial citizens. The Vox crackled again. This time, the voice wasn't human. "Little soldiers," it purred, each word dripping with malevolent amusement. "Do you understand now? You were never prey." Thorne's hand trembled as he reached for his bolt pistol. "You were always the entertainment." But the real horror hadn't even begun. Captain Vex crouched behind the twisted metal wreckage, his enhanced hearing picking up every footstep echoing through the abandoned hive city. The Chaos Space Marine was close now. Too close. The air reeked of sulfur and decay. Vex's breath came in short, controlled bursts as he pressed his back against the cold plasteel barrier. His lasgun felt pathetically small in his hands. Through the perpetual smog, he could hear it, the deliberate, methodical footsteps of his pursuer. Each step sent vibrations through the corroded floor, plating beneath him. "I can smell your fear, little soldier." The voice boomed from somewhere above. Vex's blood turned to ice. The Chaos Marine wasn't just hunting him anymore. It was playing with him. Vex had watched his entire squad die in the first 30 seconds of contact. Bolt rounds had torn through ceramite armor like paper. The screams still echoed in his mind. Now he understood what prey felt like. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched between the rusted girders and collapsed hab blocks. Vex's heart hammered against his ribs so hard, he was certain the enemy could hear it. Then came the laughter. Low, rumbling, inhuman. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the industrial decay that surrounded them both. "You think hiding will save you?" Vex closed his eyes, trying to control his breathing. His training kicked in. Move. Always keep moving. Never let them corner you. He slipped from cover, moving through the shadows between collapsed support beams. The acrid taste of promethium fumes burned his throat. Behind him, something massive crashed through the barrier he'd just abandoned. Metal shrieked against metal. "There you are!" Vex ran. His boots splashed through pools of toxic runoff as he sprinted deeper into the hive's bowels. The sound of pursuit followed. Not running, but walking. The Chaos Marine knew it didn't need to hurry. Vex's lungs burned. His legs screamed for rest. But stopping meant death. Worse than death, he rounded a corner and froze, dead end. Massive blast doors sealed the passage ahead. No way through, no way around. The footsteps grew closer. Vex turned, raising his lasgun with trembling hands. The weapon's power cell hummed weakly. Maybe 3 shots left. A shadow fell across the corridor entrance. Vex's finger tightened on the trigger as he stared into the darkness, waiting for his hunter to emerge. But what stepped into the light wasn't what he expected. Sergeant Voss pressed his back against the cold metal wall, feeling the vibrations of approaching footsteps through the deck plating. 3 days. 3 days since the Crimson Reapers had boarded their ship. He wasn't the same man who'd led 23 soldiers into the lower decks. The hunt changes you, not just your body, though the shrapnel scars and missing fingers tell their own story. It changes something deeper. The way you breathe, the way you sleep, the way you see shadows. Voss had learned to move like prey. Quick, desperate movements followed by absolute stillness. He'd learned to suppress his heartbeat through sheer will, knowing that Chaos Space Marines could hear it drumming against his ribs from 50 meters away. The smell of burnt ozone still clung to his uniform. Bolter fire. The distinctive scent that meant death was close. But something else had changed too. Something the Crimson Reapers hadn't expected. He'd stopped running. The realization came slowly, like blood seeping through bandages. Every Imperial Guard manual spoke of tactical withdrawal, strategic repositioning, living to fight another day. But when you're hunted by 8-foot-tall demigods in power armor, those words become meaningless. You either break completely, or you become something else. Voss touched the improvised explosive device strapped to his chest. 12 pounds of ship's reactor coolant and mining charges. Enough to take out a bulkhead. Maybe enough to hurt something that shouldn't be able to feel pain. The footsteps grew closer. Heavy. Deliberate. The sound of ceramite boots that had walked across 1,000 worlds, leaving nothing but ash and screaming. He thought of Private Chen, torn apart in the cargo bay. Lieutenant Morrison, whose screams had echoed through the ventilation system for 6 hours before finally stopping. 21 good soldiers, reduced to stains on the walls. But they'd taught him something valuable. The Chaos Space Marines weren't hunting for sport. They were hunting for something specific, something they needed, and Voss finally understood what. The footsteps stopped directly outside his hiding place. A low, mechanical breathing filled the air, the sound of ancient life support systems keeping something terrible alive. Voss closed his eyes and smiled for the first time in 3 days. He wasn't the prey anymore. The wall exploded inward, revealing a towering figure in crimson armor. But instead of terror, Voss felt only cold satisfaction. Because the real hunt was just beginning. Sergeant Kane's hands trembled as he armed the last melta-charge. 3 days of running. 3 days of watching his squad die one by one. Now only he and Private Voss remained, cornered in the bowels of Hive Tertius like rats in a maze. The Chaos Space Marines had herded them here deliberately. This wasn't hunting anymore. This was theater. The metallic tang of blood filled Kane's nostrils. Voss clutched his lasgun with white knuckles, the weapon's power pack blinking red. Empty. They could have killed us hours ago. Kane whispered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The truth hit him like a bolt round to the chest. They weren't prey. They were entertainment. Footsteps echoed through the corridor, the deliberate, measured pace of ceramite boots on rockcrete. No rush, no urgency, just inevitability. Kane had seen the recordings from other worlds. Chaos Marines didn't just kill. They savored. They collected screams like trophies, stretched moments of terror into hours of exquisite agony. The Emperor's children were artists of suffering. "Sir," Voss's voice cracked. "The charges won't even scratch their armor," Kane knew. But the melta-bombs weren't for the Chaos Marines. They were for the support pillars. If he couldn't escape this nightmare, he could at least deny them their prize. Bring down half the Hive section. Take a few thousand cultists with him. Maybe save someone else from this fate. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched like a blade across Kane's nerves. He could hear his own heartbeat, feel sweat freezing against his skin despite the fear heat burning in his chest. Then came the laughter, low, melodic, utterly inhuman. "Little mortals," a voice purred through the darkness, each word dripping with centuries of corruption. "Do you truly believe we haven't been watching your every move?" Kane's blood turned to ice. The detonator in his hand felt suddenly heavy. "Wrong. Did you think we couldn't smell your desperation? Taste your pathetic hope?" Voss whimpered. Kane looked down at the melta-charges, at the blinking activation lights, at the chaos runes carved into their casings, runes that hadn't been there when he'd armed them. "We gave you those explosives, Sergeant Kane. His name. They knew his name. Every step you've taken, every choice you've made, all part of our design. The charges weren't going to bring down the Hive. They were going to open something far worse." But what came next made even Kane's trained mind recoil in horror. Captain Theron had hunted Chaos Space Marines for 3 decades. Now, bleeding in the ruins of Hive Tertius, he understood what it felt like to be their quarry. The irony tasted like copper and ash. His squad of Imperial fists had tracked the word-bearers through 17 systems. They'd cornered heretics in burning cathedrals, executed traitors in the void between stars. They were the hunters, the righteous, the Emperor's own. Until today, contact lost with Sergeant Voss. Crackled through his vox. static, then screaming. Theron pressed against the collapsed wall, feeling concrete dust settle on his power armor. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since the Chaos Marines arrived. They weren't just killing his men. They were savoring it. Brother Caney's death scream echoed from 3 blocks away. Too long, too joyful. The word-bearers were taking their time, peeling away his squad like layers of an onion. "This is what you did to us on Monarchia," a voice boomed across the ruins. Amplified, mocking Dark Apostle Erebus. Theron's blood froze. Erebus had been there when the Imperial fists burned the perfect city, when they'd made the word-bearers kneel in the ashes of their greatest work. Now the roles were reversed. 43 years I've waited for this moment, Captain. Erebus continued. His voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. 43 years to show you what helplessness tastes like. Another scream. Brother Matthias this time. Theron's hands shook as he checked his bolt pistol. 12 rounds left, against 8 Chaos Space Marines who'd spent 4 decades planning this hunt. The smell of burning promethium mixed with something worse. Something organic. His men weren't just dying. They were being processed. You remember Monarchia, don't you? Erebus's laughter carried on the wind. How we begged, how we wept as our life's work burned. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, getting closer. Now you'll understand what it means to watch everything you've built crumble. Your squad, your faith, your certainty that the Emperor protects. Theron closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw his squad as they'd been this morning. Proud, unbreakable. Now only he remained. The footsteps stopped. But first, Erebus whispered, somehow right beside his ear, let me show you what we learned in the Eye of Terror about making death. Educational. Theron opened his eyes. Erebus wasn't there, but the shadows were moving. You made it, somehow impossibly. You survived what no human should survive. The hunt is over. The Chaos Space Marines have moved on to other prey, other worlds, other screams. But survival isn't victory. Your hands still shake when you hold a weapon. The smell of burning promethium makes you vomit. Every shadow could hide a 8-foot monster in corrupted ceramite. The others who ran with you? Most didn't make it past the first hour. Their faces visit you in dreams, not as they lived, but as they died. Torn apart by chainswords, melted by plasma fire. Worse things, you tell yourself you were lucky. That's the lie that lets you sleep. The truth cuts deeper. You survived because you became something else in those tunnels. Something that could abandon wounded friends. Something that could step over children to reach the evacuation point first. The Chaos Space Marines didn't just hunt your body. They hunted your soul. And they caught it. Every choice you made to live was a choice to let others die. Every second you breathed was borrowed from someone who couldn't run fast enough. The corruption isn't just in their armor. It's in what they force you to become. You survived the hunt. But did you survive yourself? The Imperium will call you a hero. They'll pin medals on your chest and parade you before crowds. They'll use your story to recruit more soldiers, more victims for the next hunt. But late at night, when the crowds go home and the medals feel heavy, you know the truth. You're not a survivor. You're a witness. A living testament to what humanity becomes when stripped of everything except the will to live. The Chaos Space Marines understand this. It's why they hunt, not just to kill, but to corrupt. To prove that beneath our noble words and righteous causes, we're all just animals fighting for one more breath. And maybe they're right. In our own world, we watch the hunt every day. Every news cycle. Every crisis. Every moment when ordinary people must choose between their survival and their souls. We lean forward. We click. We consume the spectacle of others' suffering. Are we the hunted? Or have we become the hunters? Every view is a choice. Every click, a verdict on who deserves to survive. Subscribe if you dare to keep watching. But ask yourself, what are you really hunting for? The silence after the screaming is always the worst part. You sit in the ruins of what was once a city. The acrid smoke of burning promethium stings your nostrils. Your hands shake as you press them against the cold rockcrete wall. Somewhere in the darkness, ceramite boots scrape against debris. They're still out there, still hunting. But here's the revelation that breaks every survivor's mind. You were never the prey. You were the entertainment. The Chaos Space Marines could have ended this in minutes. 8-foot-tall demigods armed with weapons that could level city blocks. They chose to make it last, 17 hours instead. Every hiding spot you found, they knew about it first. Every escape route you took, they herded you there like livestock to slaughter. The hunt was never about killing you quickly. It was about savoring your terror, feeding on your despair, watching you cling to hope as they systematically destroyed everything you loved. Your friend Marcus lasted 3 hours before they caught him. You heard his screams echo through the hab blocks, the sound of his bones breaking, his voice calling your name. They let you hear it all. The cruel mathematics of terror. 100,000 civilians reduced to 17 survivors in a single night. Not through efficiency, through artistry. You taste copper in your mouth, blood from where you bit your tongue to keep from screaming. The footsteps grow closer, deliberate, patient, because that's what it truly means to be hunted by Chaos Space Marines. You become a character in their sick theater, a plaything for gods who feast on suffering. Your death isn't an ending. It's a punchline to a joke only they understand. The wall behind you suddenly explodes inward. Ceramite fingers wrap around your throat. The Chaos Marine's helmet tilts, studying you like a scientist examining an insect. "Did you enjoy the show?" he whispers. And in that moment, you understand the most horrifying truth of all. Somewhere in the galaxy tonight, this exact scene is playing out again. New victims, new hunters, new entertainment. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, even our nightmares have become someone else's sport. The question that should haunt us isn't whether monsters exist. It's whether we're creating the conditions for them to thrive. Every click is a vote for the spectacle. Every view, a ticket to someone else's suffering.